Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 3. In this one, we will do quite a few things. We will set up the oil production, which will require the separation of two different outputs, refined oil, and hydrogen. Nothing a couple filters on our inserters can't handle. Then, we will get started on the big scale base organization, and start moving most of our stuff out of the spaghetti we created so far, and start creating nice and neat looking assembler arrays. And then, we will take care of red science, which is just around the corner, so we need to do it relatively quickly. And since we will have taken care of the oil by that point, it will be a simple job of just feeding things into the matrix labs. All the while, we will keep an eye on the dark fog, and watch as they expand at worrying speeds in our home system. Before we get started, if this is not your first video from this channel, you already know what to expect. If you want to be kept up to date, please consider subscribing, and if you like what you see, leaving a like will also help letting me know what to focus on. But enough talking, let's get into it. The first thing I wanted to accomplish was the oil. It is the first taste of complexity in the game. Until now, we had a couple inputs, and a single output on our production chains. With oil, it's the other way around. We need a single input, and we get two separate outputs, so we will need to make sure we keep them separate. The thing is, we will need a lot of refineries to get started. At least 6, and we will end up expanding those by the end of the video. And those refineries can be quite expensive this early on, so I went on a shopping spree around the base, trying to scrape enough components together to make them. Well, we just unlocked red science, but it won't be needed for a little while longer. We still have enough blue projects to keep us busy while we do other stuff. Great. We have a coal deposit nearby. We will need it to make the red cubes, since graphite is one of the components for it. Now, the oil refineries. They have a lot of separate ports we can use, but we only really need 3. We will handle the outputs on the left and right, and the input will go in the narrow side. As I've said, we have 2 separate outputs. So, one of them will go on ground level, and the other will go on an elevated belt above it. Here, I managed to mix up which side will go up and down, but it will be an easy fix once I discover it. The separation itself is pretty simple. We just tell the inserters what they are allowed to move while placing them. We just cycle through the options with the tab key. It recognizes that it's dealing with an oil refinery, so it only gave us what we needed. And we only needed to set one of them up. After that we can just copy-paste it to the other positions. While we wait for the rest of the refineries to finish crafting, we can deal with the outputs. The thing is about oil refineries, they cannot be allowed to get clogged. If it overproduces one of the materials, it will stop. So, we will need to set up a way to get rid of the excess production. This is where the belt splitters come in. They have 4 ports, and we can freely decide how we want to use them. We can use them to create a 3-to-1 balancer if we want, or in this case, a 1-to-2 splitter. And they can have priorities set on the different ports, as well as filters, but that particular feature will not be necessary in this instance. Thankfully, Both of the outputs coming from the refineries are flammable, and can be used as fuel inside the thermogenerators. So we will use those to burn off the excess production. They will act as a small supplementary power source, but we cannot rely on them for that. Ideally, we would be best served if we use the refined products in our factory, and not just burn them off because we have too much. Now, as I've said, ideally, we will want these to go toward the storage tanks I just set up, so I gave the splitters the order to prioritize that direction. And I just noticed that the belts have mixed stuff on them. We really need to keep the two products separate. Sure, we could use the filters on the splitters to separate them, but that would overload the belts way too quickly. No problem, we can quickly hoover up the unnecessary stuff from the belts as they enter the tanks, and then dump them into the correct one. Now, the generators to burn off the excess. Another problem with this method of production control is the way the generators work. They will not operate at full speed all the time, unfortunately. They will simply burn enough to satisfy the current power needs of the base, so if we have too much excess of it, they will burn things too slowly. And they can only hold a single fuel type at a time, so we will need to keep the excess burning separate too. We cannot combine them into a single generator array. I think that will do it for now. We will revisit this in a bit, since we will need the hydrogen for the red science, but how about we do some base building until then? We managed to take care of the iron and copper plate smelting, which is enough to do 2 of the components, gears and circuit boards. With foundations, we have a nice big empty area we can build on, so let's do just that. Well, as I was gathering resources for our assemblers, I couldn't get enough magnetic coils, so I decided to quickly take care of the magnetic ring smelting too. It needs to be done sooner or later anyways, so might as well. For now, I just split off from the incoming iron belt, but it's a 4-way splitter, and we only use 3 of the ports so far. We can easily use the last as another input, turning it into a 2-to-2 balancer. Okay, with that dealt with, we can move on to the assembler arrays. Let's start with the gears, they only need a single input. It is highly inefficient to split off from the line coming straight out of the smelters, especially with the Tier 1 belts, but don't forget, we are using splitters to do this. If the belts start to become too sparse to carry on, we can just plug in another belt full of components. For now, we will just go with 6 assemblers per array, but it's an easily expandable setup. We can either make them longer, or just build another one. And since we unlocked blueprints at this point, we can simply copy-paste the whole thing, and plop them down in neat rows. We just need to rearrange the belts a little bit for each individual production chain. We can do circuit boards in the next row. This one requires 2 components, and this is where belt positioning comes into play. We can check on the recipe how many we need of each component, and belt them in accordingly. Basically, the more we need of something, the closer it should be to the machine. The inserters have a travel time, the longer they are, the slower they operate. So, if we need something to go in at a faster rate, we should try to make them shorter. Circuit boards, for example, need 2 iron plates, and 1 copper plate. So ideally, we should try to have the iron on the inner belts, and copper can go on the outer one. Wait, did I mess this up? I'm watching this, and it seems I accidentally put them backwards. Well, just do what I said, not what I did. Thankfully, it won't really make a difference this early on, but on the super balanced end game setups, it will matter a lot. Well, we are short on power, and we aren't really using these oil products yet, so might as well burn them until we need them. The next product in line was the magnetic coils. Having these in such neat lines will make shopping for components a much more comfortable experience for sure. This time around, I managed to get it right. We need 2 rings and 1 copper plate, and we have the rings on the inner belt. Even a broken clock is right twice a day after all. Let's see what we can do next. Well, our options are a bit thin on the ground. Electric engines will do, I suppose. Only for this one, we will need to bring in stuff from the other direction. Only one of the 3 components are accessible from the equator bus. And as it turns out, we need that the most, so that's what will go on the inner belt. Now we just need gears and coils, all ready to go on the nearby belts. And we have engines. You see how some of the hydrogen and refined oil still make it into the storage tanks? That's because the generators aren't burning them fast enough, and that is because the power is too plentiful. Thankfully, there will come a time when we can make both refined oil and hydrogen in a way that can be allowed to back up, so we won't need to worry about having to use this kind of a setup forever. How about we do steel next? We will need that stuff sooner or later, so might as well do it now. At first, I thought about splitting off from the old iron line, but then I thought better of it. That thing is already overloaded with 2 smelting arrays using it. It definitely cannot handle a third one. Thankfully, we have a convenient iron deposit nearby that we can use. Well, we definitely need more smelters. Nice. We have a neat and tidy steel smelting array, ready to serve our factory. What I wanted to do next was the red science. We are getting close to the end of the blue technologies, so it was time to get on it. Thankfully, it's a very simple thing to do, especially since we already took care of the hard part with the oil refining. This should be more than enough room. We have all we need right here. To make red cubes, we only need to refine some coal into graphite, and use the hydrogen from the oil refineries. That's it. 2 rather simple components to do the next tier of research. Obviously, now that we are actually using the hydrogen, we should definitely tell the splitters to stop moving it toward the generators. And that's that. All we need to do now is to belt the cubes over to the matrix labs that will actually use them, and we should be set. You know what, we might as well make the old labs 3 stories high too. The thing about science cubes, their crafting times are very predictable. The blue ones take 3 seconds if I remember correctly. The red ones take 6. Please don't quote me on those numbers, but I am fairly certain that red ones take twice as long as the blues. So, to have a balanced production, we should try to have twice as many red labs as blue ones. And since we already have 3 making blue cubes, we should have 6 making reds. It's so nice to have access to higher quality components in bulk like this. We can simply go to a place, stock up on what we need, and we can craft only the actual buildings themselves, instead of having to make the intermediate stuff ourselves too. And thanks to the new offshore wind farm feature added in this update, we no longer need to worry about building foundations for our turbines, we can just plop them in the water. Very convenient. Okay, I think that will tide us over for a little bit longer. Eventually, we will likely end up moving all the turbines into the water, so they can be out of the way of our factory. Now, the next phase of research. To make the next tier of belts and inserters, we will need the magnetic levitation technology, and to make the best ones, we will also need the thrusters discovered. This is a bit of a rush towards some high-level stuff, but I'll be honest, I like to skip over the green belts whenever possible, and just go straight to using the blue ones. Same goes for the inserters, but I'm not as picky about those. Well, I was about to keep expanding our line of assembler arrays, but I couldn't really decide what to do next. We will get to the green motors before the episode's over, but there wasn't much I could go for at the moment. But there was one thing we could definitely do. And that's the expansion of the research. The more labs we have, the faster it is, so we might as well get on that. I suppose we could set up our research center here, where the components are most plentiful. That's 6 more blue science labs. Very nice. Let's place an equal amount of consumer labs, so we can actually use those cubes. And this is where we first run into the dreaded planet fault line mechanic. This is how the game handles the square grid on a sphere. As the squares get a bit too narrow as we get closer to the poles, the game kind of resets the grid, so tiles get bigger again. This results in a bit of a misalignment between the two grids whenever this border is reached. Might seem like an annoying mechanic at first, but it can be worked around quite easily, and it can even be used as an organizational mechanic, and we can use it as a dividing line between different areas in the factory. Anyways, now that we have a much better place for the research, it was time to get rid of the old labs. I would like to start slowly disassembling this base as parts of it become obsolete. But, we still need the red science, so what we needed to do next is to build a long belt to the new research center. You know, I think we have enough cubes on these belts to justify building another research tower. The one on the end will likely run dry most of the time, but it can pick up any leftovers the others cannot take in. Since this copper deposit is here, let's just start digging it up. Thing is, I really hate building over resource nodes, and whenever possible, I prefer to fully run them dry. Even if it's an overabundant resource, like stone, I still prefer to strip mine them. Alright. We finished the magnetic levitation research at this point, so we can deal with the assembly of the green motors. We will need a lot of these, they are the primary component for some of the higher tier belts and inserters. We can make the best inserters at this point, and the second best belts. I think it's safe to say, some of our time will be spent on setting up a mall for our construction needs in the next episode. It would be best if we had a central place to make and store all the different kinds of logistical and manufacturing buildings we need around the place. Now, normally, I would end the episode right here, but I didn't pay attention to the clock, so this one will run a bit long. The Red Science labs are only running at half capacity, so we can take care of that in this little bonus footage. Thankfully, we don't need to rely on our eyes to judge if a certain component is over or underproduced. We just open the production statistics window and see what's going on. If this is to be believed, we are overproducing the graphite a little bit at the moment, but we just expanded it, so we need it to settle into a balance before we can judge. But the hydrogen is not enough. I think it's time to expand our oil setup a little. We definitely need to set up a glass furnace array. Having to pick up raw stone to make it ourselves is getting kind of old at this point. Well, as it turns out, we are also running low on crude oil. The extractor cannot handle the demand. We need a second one. Thankfully, we have another deposit relatively close to the one we are using now. While the extractor is being built, we can quickly set up the line going toward our existing setup, and feed it into the old crude oil belt. Here we go. Nice and delicious oil. I followed it back to the merging point. I wanted to see just how much we will end up saturating the belt. Well, there is a tiny gap every now and then, so we have a nearly full belt of crude oil going to the refineries. We can just set up as many extra refineries as we can, before calling it a day. If we move the generators out of the way, we will be able to add more, but I didn't want to stretch the run time any longer than absolutely necessary. On the production statistics, the hydrogen was still settling into the new numbers, but the graphite was showing a 1-to-1 ratio. That either means we have a perfect balance, or we immediately use whatever we make. I lean toward the latter. To make sure we are actually making more than we need, I added a couple more furnaces. I think this will do it for today. It was quite a productive episode. We managed to not only sort out the oil refineries, the Red Science production, and all those assembler arrays for our intermediate base, we also got around to increasing our overall research capacity. We are still missing some extra Red Science labs to balance out the blue ones, but those will come in due course. From this point forward, we are pretty much on autopilot. We will keep unlocking new technologies, which will in turn give us new components and buildings to make, which we will need to start producing. We are also getting close to the point where we will need to start thinking about going interplanetary. For example, to make processors, we need silicon, which is not available on the starter planet. Well, we could technically make some out of stone, but it's highly inefficient. It's better if we just make it on one of our neighboring planets, and bring over the refined silicon. We will just need to see how the dark fog reacts to that development. And judging by what's on the screen, they are expanding at an alarming rate. Anyways, if you haven't done it already, I'd love it if you subscribe to the channel, and leaving a like would also let me know that this video was worth making. If you feel that it was good enough, and you can afford it, please consider going to my Ko-fi page, which you can find in the description, and donate an amount that you feel is appropriate. And if you did like what you've seen, there should be links to some of my other videos and playlists on the screen. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next one.